Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. A little bit of what you can expect to see here is some testing, some benchmarking, some looks and some deep dives into some old hardware, and maybe even check out some of the newer stuff that's out there. A lot of new things coming out from AMD and Intel and NVIDIA. A lot of super crazy high-end stuff that just blows you away. The focus of what I want to do here is to show you that older hardware and older tech isn't obsolete, especially now with the way prices are and the way things are going. Not everyone has some crazy amount of money like $5,000 to buy an RTX 5090 or $900 or whatever the price is at the current time for a Radeon 9070 XT or what have you, or even on the CPU side, a 9900 X3D or whatever is out latest for AMD, and whatever's out latest for Intel. Things are expensive. There are options to be able to look back into a few years ago and even further for tech options to at least get you started, to at least get you into gaming, and at least get you going. For instance, what I got running up right now is a X58 platform running an Intel Xeon X5675. It's a server grade platform that can be bought really cheap on like eBay and sites like that. Uh, the gigabyte motherboard that I'm using is a UDR3. X58 motherboards can be bought at decent prices. They depends on the model and everything. They can be expensive because they're still considered enthusiast platforms. But a couple $100 versus a couple $1,000, yeah, you do the math. So we also have this paired with the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti from EVGA, and if you're watching the channel, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with how legendary a 1080 Ti is. Even by today's standards, it's still a very capable graphics card. Along with that, we also have 24 gigs of triple channel DDR3 memory, and I know you're thinking DDR3, holy crap, we're on DDR5 right now. DDR3 is still very capable on an older platform. You're not going to get modern day speeds on this stuff, but you can't compare older hardware to newer hardware. They're light years away. That doesn't mean it's obsolete though. You can still get a decent gaming performance, decent productivity, and decent just everyday usage out of an older system that you pay a few $100s for, as opposed to dropping a couple grand. A lot of people out there don't have a few $1,000s laying around just to drop on PC hardware. So there are other options, viable ones, to get you going. I also have MSI Afterburner up here just to show stats. Nothing's overclocked on the graphics card. I do have some tweaks and other things going on with the platform I'm using. That can be gone over in a later video. This is just to show a general idea of performance from something as old as an X58 platform, which I'm pretty sure came out probably around 2010, 2011, in that area, at the beginning of the Core i7, i5, and i3 stages. So the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna pop up the old Firestrike 3D Mark run, and just to give you a baseline on a synthetic test on how this runs. You'd be surprised at how fast it actually goes. Now, the Xeon that I have in the system is a 6-core 12-thread chip, like I mentioned, server grade, but they can be had for very little money. So there are some caveats and drawbacks to something this old. You're not going to get NVMe speeds on your hard drive, or on your drive rather. You're not going to get PCIe 3.0, 4.0, or I think we're on 5.0 at this point. But that doesn't mean that you still can't get a good experience from it. It still can run a solid state drive at SATA 6 speeds, which for your general usage is going to be plenty of speed. It's not going to be an NVMe drive speed, but for what it's worth, you're still going to get good speeds. Now, if you take a look at the top left-hand corner, you can see that the EVGA 1050 Ti, or 1080 Ti rather, is not really being held back too much by the Xeon processor. Xeon's hitting anywhere from 34 to 40% usage on all 12 threads, and you get 96 to 99 usage on the graphics card. Obviously the Xeon is going to bottleneck the 1080 Ti a little bit in some scenarios, but it's going to be negligible, as you're running things. A lot of times with a lot of people that put out content and such that talk about exactly what I'm talking about, they'll tell you that this stuff is obsolete, and that's perfectly fine for them to, that's their opinion. A lot of people do want the latest and greatest, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But as I mentioned earlier, not everyone can afford a $5,000 graphics card, or a $600 motherboard, or $400 or $500 CPU. And for those people that can, that's awesome. And those people that can't, well, that's why I'm showing you this type of stuff. As you can see with the benchmark, everything's running pretty good, no problems. Even the physics test on the old Xeon here is holding strong. And these old Xeons do tend to run pretty cool with a with a nice tower cooler or an AIO. So, with that being said, there's a lot of options out there for older tech to get you started. Whether it just be, you want to do what I do and then test a lot of old stuff and see how it runs with modern day equipment, modern day games, and everything like that, which we will jump into a more modern game that is able to run on this platform after the bench test here. This is a perfectly capable system to get you started. There are caveats, like I said, about the speeds of the PCIe lanes and the drive speed and everything like that. Some people will, may not like that because it's slower than what's available, and everybody, of course, likes lightning fast. But that, once again, that does not make it unusable. And you can see that we got a good score on the 3D Mark run. The average, a little less than average, but that's because there's stuff running in the background. They got apps open and everything. But I mean the graphics score is pretty good. The physics score, that's pretty good too as well. As far as an old X58 platform Xeon running. So, but as you can see, even in something that they estimate, which obviously this is 3D Mark, it's synthetic test, but they estimate that in something like Battlefield 5, which is an older game, but you could run 1440p Ultra and get somewhere around 95 plus FPS. And the thing with 1440p is it takes some load off the CPU and puts it more on the GPU, so you can even get more frames, if you run like that. Go ahead and close that out. And we will bring up my vast game library. And we'll hop into Resident Evil 4 Remake. It's a fairly newer title. And this platform is absolutely able to run it. You're not gonna get like 200, 300 FPS or anything like that, but you will get playable games, and you can run pretty decent settings. So it's not like you can't play something like this. Now, another caveat with the old with this older setup is instruction sets for the CPU. Now it is missing some of the newer AVX and AVX2 instruction sets. So a game like Resident Evil Requiem, unfortunately, will not run on this because of the CPU missing the instruction sets for that particular game. But as you can see here, Resident Evil 4 boots right up. We'll have a hop into the options menu and check out the graphics settings. Just check that out here. So, okay. Well, we'll change the screen resolution to what it's supposed to be. So, it's a 1080p screen. It has a refresh rate of, well, it's 165, but this is reading 164.99. Full screen. That's all on. And we'll come down here. Image quality 100%, rendering mode 100, FXAA, TAA for anti-aliasing. And because the 1080 Ti has a nice big VRAM capability of 11 gigs, you can crank up the texture quality to, high. And here's the rest of the settings as well, going down the line here. Not much is turned off or on low. A couple of settings on low here and there. A lot of everything's set to high. So we'll hop in and just do a couple minutes of gameplay just to show you how it runs, and that it's actually relatively smooth. I'll talk about the stats up in the left hand corner here in a second. Obviously the CPU is being hit right now because of it's loading and everything, so you're going to see some crazy utilization, but that'll eventually drop once we get into the actual game. So as you can see, getting more than playable frames. Nothing crazy high, but more than playable, and even in the cinematic aspect here. See, the CPU is being pegged pretty hard. GPU not so much, but that does change as we get into actual gameplay. So we'll go ahead and skip through this. See, getting playable frames in the opening area here for Resident Evil 4 remake. A little choppy, a little stuttery, but I mean, if you look at it, look how old the system is, and Resident Evil 4 came out very recently. I forget exactly when. I think it was last year or so. It's not an old game by any standard. So you are CPU limited, like I mentioned earlier. Newer games like this are going to hammer the CPU pretty hard. But the fact of the matter that is, it's playing this game, and it's relatively smooth. You get a couple of hitches here and there, but that's going to happen. I mean, this is like 15-plus-year-old tech. It should be looked at as like a marvel to that something, in the tech space, this ancient is able to play, a game that came out within the last couple years and play it fairly smoothly, even though you're seeing up there that the utilization of the 1080 Ti is not anywhere near where it could be, and that's just the CPU holding it back, limitation of the older tech, but still maintaining playable frame rates, playable frames, with pretty high graphic settings as well. I mean, we're using a little less than 10 gigs of system RAM and not even 8 gigs of the video RAM. So running this at 1440p would probably take some of the strain off of the Xeon and give you even smoother gameplay there. And of course, going inside buildings and stuff, CPU usage drops dramatically, and GPU usage goes up a little bit better. So there's still life left in this, older platform. If you can handle some of the slower speeds on some of the, on some of the other components, the limitations of the AVX instructions and such like that. Um, if this is something you have access to, or you inherited from somebody else, or you found something laying on the side of the road, what have you, and you want to restore it and fix it up, and have something to play some games on, this is perfectly capable. With with the caveats that I mentioned in place, it's still very capable. I've also been able to load up Borderlands 3 and Borderlands 4, though Borderlands 4 is a mess with optimizations, as far as especially with older hardware. But it does boot. It does load up. It takes a minute. Compiling the shaders takes a while. And, that's to be expected, because that's extremely intensive on the CPU to load up all the shading, the shaders as you're going into the game. But it does load in, and you can play it. It's not very smooth. I was averaging, with custom settings, probably 38 FPS in that game. The Borderlands 3 runs really well on this. I get about similar frame time and frame rates as I'm getting right here with Resident Evil 4. So it's a very capable, system. But we will hop out of that. I just want to give you a rundown that this is very capable of running a lot of newer games and a lot of newer stuff. So it's not it's not dead. It's not obsolete like a lot of people would make you believe. A system like this can perfectly navigate the internet, can perfectly navigate, listening to music, YouTube, all that sort of thing. Can play games without really any issue, with like I said, with the exception of the AVX instructions. So unfortunately, like this, Resident Evil Requiem won't play. But Resident Evil 2 plays, Resident Evil 3 plays, you just saw Resident Evil 4, that plays. Monster Hunter World plays on this. Monster Hunter Wilds does not. An older game like Shadow of War plays perfectly well on this. There's Borderlands 4. I'm not going to load that up because that'll take forever to load up. But I assure you it does load, and it does play. Just not great. Another game that works well on this is, and I don't have it installed on this system, but Diablo 4 works pretty good on it. Doom and Doom Eternal both run and work very well on this system. I can spend some time in different videos to benchmark each one of these, individually, and show you what kind of frames you'll get, what kind of gameplay you'll get, and everything using this kind of system. So, and then of course any kind of like World of Tanks or those types of games are not a problem. When I play World of Tanks on this, I can pretty much get almost 165 lock solid pretty decently. Like games like Call of Duty. I haven't tried any of the new Call of Duties because that's not really my bag. But like all of the Call of Duties I have on my list all work on this system. Of course Black Ops does. That's way back. Black Ops 3 does. World of War obviously does, because that's another old 360 title. And then World War II works pretty good on this as well. There's not many games on my list, on my Steam library list here, that I can't get to work on this. The only one I've so far run into that I tried was obviously Resident Evil Requiem, and the Monster Hunter Wilds, which is a new Monster Hunter that came out a couple years ago. And that's just because of missing instruction sets. And there's there's that's the unfortunate aspect of when this system came out. Those instruction sets weren't widely utilized yet. They weren't put into Intel CPUs until I think it was probably Ivy Bridge. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that one, but I'm pretty sure Ivy Bridge was when they started adding AVX instructions, or at least AVX2. And I know the old FX series from AMD had the AVX instructions because, for how crappy that the FX series chips were for on the AMD side, they still had the instruction sets and they can play anything modern. As far as I know, I haven't tested anything from AMD back then recently, so I'm not entirely sure on that one. So don't quote me, but I know they do have a lot of the modern instruction sets, even on the old FX line. But you'll arguably, in my opinion at least, get better performance with an X58 Xeon than you would an old pile driver or bulldozer CPU from AMD. Now, obviously, anything Ryzen is going to blow this out of the water. It's just because when Ryzen came out, we all, if you watch channels like mine, then you know that Ryzen has been like the top dog almost since it came out. Once Zen Plus, Zen 2, Zen 3, and then so on came out. They took for the most part, and it can be argued, obviously, that they took the top notch for CPU. So now this isn't the only platform that I'm going to talk about on this channel. There's going to be a lot of different things that I'm going to show. I just wanted to give an introduction, and to some old tech, such as X58. I don't go back any further. I don't go to the Pentium 4s or the Socket 775 like Core 2 Duos or Core 2 Quads, because while they can still run like Windows 10 and stuff like that, you can get some okay usage out of it gaming wise, unless you're running like really old games. You're not going to be able to really play much modern stuff on an old Core 2 Quad. Now, those, I wouldn't say they're obsolete, because you can still use them. That's the thing. I don't feel that something's obsolete until it is absolutely unusable. And that's where my argument with a lot of current people come from when it comes to the tech space. Is I've seen many videos that talk about old hardware, especially something like this. I don't put names out there, and I'm not, because I don't wish to talk negatively, but I will say that they're like, oh, you can't use this. You can't use this system. It's unplayable. Well, if you're seeking the maximum frames that you can get out of anything, of course, newer stuff is going to be the go-to. And then AMD and NVIDIA people will argue about which one has the best GPU or price performance or whatever. That's all fine. That's all fine. Arguably the RTX 5090 is the best GPU out there right now. Despite any thing with its AI upscaling and all that other stuff and all the features that it has, it doesn't matter. It's at its current time is one of the best gaming GPUs out there. But that doesn't mean that that's the only gaming GPU out there. AMD doesn't have anything to match it, but that doesn't mean AMD doesn't have good performing cards. So so my point being is to say that like something that this is not good or this is not good. That's not what I'm here for. I'm not going to argue about the bleeding edge of every piece of tech that comes out and what's better, or which company puts out this or which company puts out that. That's better. And at the end of the day, all the tech companies are billion-dollar companies. They're making stuff to make money. And arguing about who makes what better isn't going to get anyone anywhere. A lot of people get into PC gaming because it's fun. There's a lot more you can mess with as far as graphics settings. There's a lot higher frame rates you can get. with new stuff, or even, with even some older stuff, to give you a really smooth experience that makes it fun to play the game. And a lot of people prefer mouse and keyboard. A lot of people prefer a controller, and you can use a controller with, with PC as well. But like I said, my biggest gripe is I don't want to say misinform, but give an opinion, more of an opinion, in my opinion, of whether or not certain hardware is unusable. When maybe in one use case it might not be as usable as something much newer. Case in point with what I said about Resident Evil Requiem not working on this system because of AVX instructions. If that game is the only game that you would want to play, I would not recommend something this old. Now, an X79 platform, I've ran Resident Evil 9 Requiem on an X79 Socket 2011 system with a 8-core Xeon that I have in that. I'll talk about that system at some point too, because you'd be surprised what that thing is capable of with an 8-core 16-thread Xeon from the Ivy Bridge generation. Resident Evil 9 works perfectly fine on that because it has the instruction sets to play it. With those caveats aside, with this system, it's really, it's responsive. I mean, everything pops up really quickly. It is running Windows 10. That's a whole nother can of worms when it comes to stuff. How Windows 11 in one fell swoop made pretty much anything below was it 8th gen, I think, Intel and setups. Basically, you can't put Windows 11 on them without doing some kind of workaround, and I've read that they're trying to actively patch all the workarounds to get around that. That's something that is just not a good look in my opinion, as far as an operating system. Microsoft doing something like that that pretty much makes anything older than what the system requirements are obsolete. But it's not obsolete. I still run Windows 10. I'm not going to recommend running Windows 10. I'm not going to recommend running any operating system, because there's catches with everything. I still run Windows 10. You run into security and vulnerabilities and such. It's less likely on a personal computer at home, as long as you're connected to a secure network within your home and everything like that. Generally, I haven't had any issues. I'm not recommending. I'm not recommending anything like that. I'm not here to make recommendations. So, but I will express that I've had good time with Windows 10, and it still runs everything perfectly. My newer stuff that I have, which I'll talk about at a later point, I run Windows 11 on. But if you can only get something like this, if you can only find some older hardware that you can afford to at least get you started, to get you into it, maybe even want to do tech enthusiast stuff like I'm doing right now. I love older hardware. It's really fun to get in and tweak stuff and do different things in order to see just how much performance and how much speed you can get out of something that's got some serious age behind it as far as technology goes. And if you're not into all the tweaking and all that kind of stuff, that's nothing wrong with that either. If a system like this is all that you can afford, it's a perfect way to get started and get into it. And then upgrade down the line. There isn't an upgrade path with X58. It's an end of life platform, but that's okay. I got as far as this system is concerned, I have one of the top upgrades as far as CPUs that you can put in this. There's another Xeon 5680 or something like that. I don't, I'm not exactly sure on the number scheming for that one, but it's clocked a little bit higher than base clock anyway. Clocked a little bit higher than what mine is base clock, but it's they both basically overclock about the same. You get about 4.4, maybe 4.5 gigahertz if you mess around with overclocking, but the performance difference between like 4.4 and 4.5 is negligible. You're not even going to notice it, unless you're doing like benchmark runs and you want to get the absolute bleeding edge score you can out of 3D Mark runs. As far as gaming concerned, that extra zero point 0.1 gigahertz isn't going to make a difference. With most older platforms, there's obviously no upgrade path because they're all end of life. Your upgrade paths are going to be much newer stuff, from Intel side, and much newer stuff from AMD with Ryzen platforms like the AM4 platform. Multiple upgrade paths for CPUs and stuff like that. And even with AM5, same thing. Multiple. That's the current gen that we're on right now. There's probably going to be quite a few more CPU upgrades as we go along here before they go to AM6 or something like that, if that's the next step in AMD's thought process. The same with Intel. Intel does their upgrade paths a little differently, as we know. It's usually every few iterations of their CPUs, and they put out a new motherboard or something like that. But still, newer Intel has an upgrade path, and that's all right. That's the way it works. As far as upgrading, nothing is going to be able to be upgraded forever. They're always going to come out with a new socket or a new platform with a new chipset and a new CPU or something or what have you. That's going to have upgraded internals in the board and make it like much quicker than the last. Work around all the bottlenecks that are in the actual platform itself. So, with that being said, that's just a little introduction to what you have to look forward here. This isn't going to be the only thing that I test or look into or explain. I would be happy to go into further details about tweaking and about things that I've done with this platform to get it to run as quickly as it does. A lot of there's a lot of tweaks that can be done to RAM and RAM timings. There's the tweaks to the north and south bridge on this platform that you can work with the speeds to make it communicate quicker, so there's less of a bottleneck with communication, so everything runs just that much quicker. And I'd like to get into the X79 platform because currently that is my favorite platform that I've overclocked and benchmarked and ran tests on and everything like that, and it's a relatively inexpensive platform, much like the X58 platform. And the good thing about that is, as I mentioned earlier, has the newer instruction sets, which, like I said, allows you to be able to play like Resident Evil 9 Requiem, as far as some of the newer games out there. The system plays Borderlands 4 rather well also. Of course, that has a lot to do with it being an 8-core 16-thread chip that's in it, and that's also been tweaked and overclocked, as there's a lot of performance left on the table when it comes to older chips. With the newer stuff, and with Ryzen and Intel's chips, a lot of times you can just set it and forget it, basically. The motherboard does a lot of things automatically to give you a good experience right out of the box. Typically you don't even have to necessarily even mess with XMP profiles for the RAM nowadays. Sometimes it'll turn that on automatically for you. You got Precision Boost Overdrive with AMD, which you just you put the chip in and then it'll automatically overclock cores, to the speed that is on the box, and you won't even need to mess with it. And sometimes that works even better than overclocking all the cores at once. But that once again, that's another video there. We can talk about about new stuff. I do have a Ryzen 9 9800 X3D, I believe it is, and then I do have an RTX 5090 on an X870E platform. So I'll be able to talk about that and all the craziness that comes with such a bleeding edge leap in technology, especially from going from like X58 to something like that. So those are all things that you can look forward to. I plan to do, like I said, I plan to do a lot of bench testing if that's something that you guys would like to see. I will be happy to explain the tweaks, how to overclock, how to tweak timings for RAM, especially on older systems. I plan to do game benchmarks, like I mentioned earlier, to show that like something like this system that you're seeing currently is able to be used for gaming, and it's not obsolete. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys coming to check out the channel. I appreciate you sitting through my long rants about tech, and I look forward to seeing you guys again, and talking about all this cool stuff that's still around that is not obsolete in my opinion, and can give for a good time and a good experience with getting into or just messing around with computers. So wish all of you a good day. Take care. Grimmtech out.